In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King is back home after a working visit to the United States and a series of meetings dominated by the Middle East and cementing a strategic Jordanian-US partnership. Russia and China veto a UN Security Council resolution to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court. And Thailand's Army Chief General seizes control of the government in a coup, drawing Western condemnation. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King is back home after a working visit to the United States. During a phone call, King Abdullah and US President Barack Obama discussed political developments in the Middle East and ways to strengthen a strategic Jordanian-US partnership. The King also discussed on the telephone with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon the crisis in Syria and agreed that the international community should step up support for Jordan to enable it to continue its humanitarian role in the region. And in New York City, King Abdullah attended a conference held by the Clinton Global Foundation to support a Jordanian national plan that seeks to help host communities of Syrian refugees. In a speech at the event, King Abdullah highlighted burdens borne by Jordan as the result of hosting more than 1.3 million Syrians on its territory, making the kingdom the third world host of refugees. His Majesty pointed out that international aid Jordan received focuses on the humanitarian needs and relief services to the refugees. In Washington, King Abdullah discussed with US Secretary of State John Kerry bilateral cooperation and developments in the Middle East. His Majesty started his visit in California, where he met a number of business leaders and delivered a speech at the innovative Jordan conference hosted by the University of California in Berkeley. King Abdullah also met CEOs of major US companies to discuss ways to strengthen investment relations between the two countries. The King also met with the representatives of civil society organizations in the US West Coast and leading American and international filmmakers. Jordan Uranium Mining Company has received a technical report on potential quantities of uranium in the kingdom's central region. The report was compiled by internationally accredited experts according to a Joint Ore Reserve Committee JORC code. JORC is a professional code of practice that sets minimum standards for public reporting of mineral exploration results, mineral resources and ore reserve. The company's general manager, Samir Al-Qahouk, said in a press conference with Marat Abzalov, exploration manager at Rio Tinto Uranium Limited, that field explorations will continue in all areas where uranium might be found. Qahouk said layers containing uranium ore are close to the surface, which means low mining cost. He said uranium extraction experiments are underway by his Jordan's company staff and that a feasibility study will assess the environmental impact of mining after the exploration and extraction processes are completed.
The report states that as of March 31st, in the first phase of exploration being conducted by the Jordanian Uranium Mining Company, JUMCO, up to March 31st, we have in our hand well over 36,000 metric tons of uranium oxide. And with the other areas being explored as we're talking, it's in the next phase of exploration. So this will finally close the subject. Is there uranium in Jordan? Yes, there is. The proof is in the report, in all the hard work that has went into completing and documenting the report.
In other news, a Palestinian official said a Palestinian national unity government in the making will be headed by Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah. The Palestine Liberation Organization and Hamas leaders in the Gaza Strip have reached an agreement to form a national unity government after 7 years of division. Meantime, around 5,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails staged a hunger strike in solidarity with detainees held without trial who have been on hunger strike for the last 29 consecutive days. In a breach of international law, the so-called administrative detainees are often held for months and are not allowed any access to the evidence leading to their detention. Russia and China have vetoed the resolution to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court. In the escalating violence in Syria, meanwhile, rebel forces and government troops clashed in several areas across the country. Here's more.
Russia and China again block UN action over the Syrian civil war. The two powers vetoed a resolution to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court for possible prosecution of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during the country's 3-year civil war. This was the fourth time Russia, a close ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government, and China have vetoed UN Security Council resolutions on the 3-year Syrian civil war that has killed more than 150,000 people. The United States and Britain criticized the vetoes.
It is this Council's responsibility to stop atrocities, if we can, and at a minimum to ensure that the perpetrators of atrocities are held accountable. Sadly, because of the decision by the Russian Federation to back the Syrian regime no matter what it does, the Syrian people will not see justice today. They will see crime, but not punishment.
And it is disgraceful that they have yet again vetoed the Security Council's efforts to take action in response to the appalling human rights violations being committed every day in Syria.
Russian UN Ambassador Vitaly Cherkin questioned why the resolution was put to a vote when it would again expose disunity in the Council. There were more than 60 co-sponsors of the French-drafted resolution. The resolution was put to a vote with the knowledge that it would be vetoed. The remaining 13 members of the Council voted in favor of the resolution.
If members of the Council continue to be unable to agree on a measure that could provide some accountability for the ongoing crimes, the credibility of this body and of the entire organization will continue to suffer.
The ICC prosecutor cannot investigate the situation in Syria without a referral from the 15-member Security Council because Damascus is not a member of the Rome Statute that established the Hague-based court a decade ago. The Security Council has previously referred Libya and Darfur, Sudan to the ICC. In the ongoing war in Syria, government forces and rebels traded a barrage of fire with shells and surface-to-surface missiles in the town of Mleha, east of the capital Damascus. Fighting also raged in Aleppo and the southern city of Der'a. The fighting persisted as Syria's presidential election draws closer. The poll, whose validity is disrupted by the West and some Arab countries, is just 2 weeks away. Hala Dababne for the news at 10.
And in neighboring Iraq, sectarian violence continues to take lives. 32 people were killed in 3 attacks on Shiite pilgrims walking in Baghdad ahead of a major religious holiday in the country. The attackers defied a shutdown of major roads for Shiite religious faithful who were heading to the Imam Kadhim shrine in Kadhimiya in western Baghdad. The deadliest attack was in eastern Baghdad near Tayran Square, where a minibus approached a crowd of pilgrims and exploded, killing 14 people. In the western neighborhood of Mansour, a parked car exploded, killing 6 people. And in the eastern district of Shab, another parked vehicle blew up near a group of pilgrims, killing 12. The violence comes just 3 days after the preliminary results of Iraq's election confirmed Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki as the favorite to form the next government. A Libyan renegade general called on the government to hand over power to the country's top judges. The call by General Khalifa Haftar was a new challenge against authorities, which comes amid continuing heavy fighting in the capital. Western powers fear Haftar's call for army units to join his campaign will split the military and trigger more turmoil in a country struggling to restore order. The government is unable to control the militias who helped oust Muammar Gaddafi, but are now defying the authorities. The renegade general said government and parliament had lost any legitimacy because they were unable to purge Libya of extremists roaming around unchallenged.
Following the refusal by the expired National Council to meet the people's demands, the High Council of the Armed Forces calls on the High Judicial Council in charge to meet the army's demand for civil and political stability in Libya and ask them to form a High Council to rule the country.
Thailand's Army Chief General Prayuth Chan-o-cha seized control of the government in a coup 2 days after he declared martial law in the country. He said the army had to restore order and push through reforms after 6 months of turmoil. The United States said it's reviewing military and other aid to Thailand, while the United Kingdom urged the country to restore a democratically elected civilian government. More in this report.
2 days after declaring martial law in Thailand, Army Chief Prayut Chan-o-cha announced he was taking over, officially. In a national broadcast, he explained his objective.
To reform the social structure economically and socially, and in other ways to create equality for everyone and for every side. The Peace Maintaining Committee, which consists of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as the National Police, has to take control of power to administrate the country from 22nd of May 2014 onward.
Hundreds of soldiers surrounded Bangkok's Army Club shortly before the announcement and could be seen confiscating weapons. Earlier in the week, Chan-o-cha called rival factions to a meeting whose goal, he said, was to end the protests and violence that have gripped the country. That meeting ended with no agreement. Shortly after Thursday's coup was confirmed, the military issued a national curfew, banning people from leaving their homes between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said his country's talks with world powers over its nuclear program reached an important and tough juncture. But he said an agreement is still possible by a July deadline. The lack of progress during talks in Vienna that ended last week between Iran and the United States, Russia, China, France, Britain and Germany had raised doubts over the prospects for a breakthrough by the July 20 deadline. Rouhani was speaking in Shanghai, where he attended a regional summit and held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He said an early deal would benefit all, but there was no rush to finalize the talks.
I think the negotiations have reached a very important and sensitive and tough juncture, and I think that it has been a matter of contention for years. So in order to resolve it, it takes time. We cannot expect it to be resolved in just a couple of meetings. But we at the same time, we are not pessimistic about the 5+1 and the final agreement. We still have time, and we can achieve this, and even come to an agreement in the next 6 months.
Ukraine will hold presidential elections on Sunday. The negotiator, or its negotiator for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, said he hoped violence would subside in 3 days' time so that the poll can proceed as planned. Meantime, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry confirmed 8 soldiers were killed and 18 wounded in overnight clashes near the eastern city of Donetsk. Russia also said it's moving troops and military equipment from border regions near Ukraine. But NATO said a large so-called coercive force remained in place. Russia has previously failed to keep promises to move troops back from the frontier with eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists have declared independence. A NATO general said Moscow was moving troops, but the size of the movement was unclear and that forces near the border remained a potential threat.
Where they're moving to or how many of them are moving, but what we do know is that the force that remains on the border is very large and it's very capable and remains in a very coercive posture.
In China, explosives hurled from 2 vehicles into an open market in the country's troubled Xinjiang region have left 31 people dead and wounded 94. The attack in the regional capital of Urumqi were the deadliest act of violence in the region in years. China called the bombing a serious terrorist incident, and the local security chief vowed to step up a crackdown against what he called terrorists. The White House also condemned the attack against civilians. China has blamed a series of knife and bomb attacks in recent months on separatist militants from Xinjiang, the traditional home of the ethnic Muslim Uyghurs. The Russian football squad held the first training session as part of the preparations for the World Cup. The Russians did not qualify for the 2010 World Cup in South Africa after losing a playoff to Slovenia, and the minimum requirement in Brazil will be to qualify from the group stages for the first time since the breakup of the Soviet Union. This is probably achievable in Group H, that also contains Belgium, Algeria and South Korea. France trained in the raid at Clairefontaine, hoping for a sustained period of peace as they prepare for the World Cup. Earlier in the week, Captain Igor Lloris had already urged his teammates to maintain their form and unity as they began the build-up to Brazil. Centre-back Ilaquim Mangala has an ankle injury, while striker Karim Benzema of Real Madrid has a groin problem ahead of Saturday's Champions League final. France are in Group E with Ecuador, Switzerland and Honduras. And England striker Wayne Rooney said there will be no excuses from him if he fails to deliver at the World Cup. Since bursting onto the international stage with 4 goals at Euro 2004 as an 18-year-old, the Manchester United striker has not impressed at major tournaments, not scoring in the 2 World Cups he has played in. England's hopes of progressing in the tournament may well be linked to whether Rooney can find his best form. Speaking to the media at England's training camp in Portugal, Rooney acknowledged the weight of expectation on him, saying he was fit and ready to go in Brazil.
Obviously I've been here before and I've said what I feel I can deliver and what I can do, and it hasn't happened, but I think this is the one where I have to show what I can do, and I believe I'm in the best possible shape, I'm in the best condition I can be in to do that. I'm ready for it, excited for it, and you know, there'll be no excuses this time if I don't perform. I certainly won't be looking for any excuses this time.
Finally, a look at the weather forecast. It will be cool tonight across the hilly areas and fair elsewhere in the country. Winds will be northwesterly light, picking up at times. Tomorrow, pleasant conditions are forecast for much of the hilly areas, where temperatures will range from mid to high 20s. The Jordan Valley, however, should expect hot weather tomorrow, especially across its southernmost areas. Winds will be northwesterly brisk, blowing dust in the desert region. Aqaba should expect fair weather tonight, but hot conditions tomorrow will prevail, with northerly brisk winds and choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Now, our top stories once again. His Majesty the King is back home after a working visit to the United States and a series of meetings dominated by the Middle East and cementing a strategic Jordanian-US partnership. Russia and China veto a UN Security Council resolution to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court. And Thailand's Army Chief General seizes control of the government in a coup, drawing Western condemnation. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad Lepouche. Thanks for watching.